Hi, folks. Thanks for choosing to listen to this episode. I just want to let you know before we get into it that I've done an overhaul on Patreon. So if you want to get early access to episodes, bonus episodes, and much more, head over there and sign up. Next week's episodes are already there waiting to be listened to. Okay, that's enough from me, so enjoy this episode. Is everybody in? Is everybody in? The show is about to begin.
Welcome to the podcast, Concerts That Made Us. Interviews and stories, tales from the bus. We love taking you back to when it all went down. The greatest live shows and the cheering crowd sound. It's concerts, concerts that made us, concertsthatmadeus.com.
Hey there, this is Dusty from Vision Video, and you are listening to Concerts That Made Us.
Dusty, you're very welcome to Concerts That Made Us.
Hi, thanks for having me.
It's great now. I'm really looking forward to diving into your music over the next bit. First off, Vision Video recently released the album Modern Horror. It's a much larger sound and darker than your previous releases. Can you take us a bit deeper into it?
Yeah. Yeah, I think with modern horror, the quality of the production and the largeness, as it were, of that record is due in part by, having Ben Allen, the producer, working on that record with us at Maze Studios. Ben is he's one of those producers that's kind of worked on every imaginable genre of music. But I think that kind of gives him, a very broad scope of what music can be. And he is such a master at work when in the studio and operating in that production role. So there's a lot of him, I think, in the record that brought that big sound. Um, but as an aside, looking at our earlier records, a lot of us building the sound and sort of forming the identity of the band. Earlier on with guitar, I was playing a lot of stuff that was inspired by, uh, you know, early post-punk, and it was less into the sort of jagged end of like goth rock, as it were. Whereas with this record, I really wanted to be quite literal with the theme, and exploring sort of the darker proclivities of human existence in this day and age. And I think that darker, edgier sound to the record really lent well to the subject matter, especially.
Absolutely, absolutely. With exploring such dark themes, then how did you approach writing it compared to the other albums?
I think the other albums are the first two records are much more introspective in regards to my experiences in the world. I was like with the first record, I'd just been diagnosed with PTSD between the military and being a firefighter paramedic here in the Atlanta area. And I was just dealing with a lot of like looking inwards, and trying to create art that was cathartic to a lot of those experiences that I had. Whereas this record, I feel like is a look at the world, and it's still through my lens of experience and through my feelings because of the things that I've seen and done. But it's more of a look at the conditions that we all face, versus one that's more of an internal universe.
True, true. And, I want to jump back to working with Ben. When you're working with someone of that caliber, what kind of challenges kind of pop up along the way, or do challenges pop up?
Yeah, I mean, I think the initial challenge is just trying to find, I mean, like, I think Ben is such a very, he has like such a stylized way of production, and sort of marrying like your vision with that level of production is a very different thing than what we had done in the past. Because like our first two records were produced by Tom Ashton, who's of the guitar player of the March Violets. He also runs Sub Von Studios, which is a really great experience, but it's very different. It's a little bit more, you know there's not like a team, it's just like
Hmm.
you and Tom, and it's a little bit more time intensive. But it's also like less time restrictive, because there's not just like, okay, we're going to be in the studio these days. We kind of just like worked on the record till it was done. Whereas, with Ben, being this sort of like very high end, a little bit more expensive of an experience, you're sort of bound to these very like explicitly set upon dates. So there's a lot of like limitations that we weren't used to in that regard, but it's also um, like, I guess we had more hands-on control with the first two records, whereas this one there was a lot more input from Ben. um, where he was saying like, "Hey, let's try this," or "Hey, let's record another layer of guitar over this," or "Let's try this like kind of experimental thing." So I think, just as a musician, like it was a learning experience of like giving up a level of control also, um to make something better. But that's the good thing is that working with him, you realize like he's at the top of his trade, and you've got to trust these people, to that are going to help you make the best songs and the best record possible. But yeah, I'd say there were dramatically less, challenges than there were, in regards to just making progress, because it was such a great experience of being in there with him and like just watching him work. And I learned a lot about production, and I even learned a lot about creating better songs, through the process of layering sound and creating more interesting sounds, and not just like sort of taking things at face value.
Yeah, I get you. I get you. Where do you go from here, though? The next record, how do you top it?
Yeah. Well, I think, I mean, to me, I think I have very little interest in ever writing like the same record twice, because it's just really not kind of something that I respect in the world of art. I think it's very easy to just sort of like phone in a bunch of like mediocre songs, or sort of replicate something to an extreme degree that you've already done. I think that's a sort of its own form of dishonesty within an artist. And that's why, like, when I look at some of my favorite bands, bands like The Cure, for example, Dave wrote so many different kinds of music. They wrote, like extremely pop records. They wrote, straight up goth rock records. They wrote post punk, and there's a broad diversity, but they all maintains their sense of voice. So I think whatever we do moving forward, it will still maintain the sense of voice and what makes it Vision Video. But I'm also, I'm looking at, kind of digging my heels into what you start to hear in this new record, which is a little bit more, rawness, a little bit more, like of an aggressive, intense, darker sound, and just sort of moving away from the poppier elements of what I mean. I do love those aspects of our first two records, and that still exists in our new record. But I think, for the fourth album, I'm really looking forward to kind of finding the dirt under the carpet and and exploring that, so to speak.
And that sounds very exciting. And we have to talk about the music videos. I mean, I love them. The level of production, the stories, everything about them. How do you approach, what's your approach to making such gripping music videos?
Oh, thanks. No, I mean, I think a lot of it kind of for me boils down to the fact that when I was a kid, I really wanted to be like a director of film. I wanted to get into filmmaking. And then I sort of wanted to, at one point when I was in my late teens and early 20s, before I joined the military, I wanted to work in special effects makeup for like horror films. Like I was really into, creating prosthetic masks, or, just doing like wild horror based makeup. So I've always kind of had a penchant for that realm of things. And I think I have a mild eye for cinematography. So for me, it's like, it all kind of starts with, the genesis of the idea, but the idea of a video has to be something that I can very visually see in my mind's eye. So, for example, when we came up with the video for "In My Side," which is, I think, our best video, that started, the idea started with our former bass player Dan Geller's partner Lindsay Lee. We were all sitting at dinner one night, and she said, "What if you guys had a video where you're performing, but there's this like witch who's sort of manipulating you while you're performing?" and like kind of messing with you. So that was sort of the genesis of the idea. But then I started to kind of mull on that, and I was like, let's make it into this story. Like, let's build this narrative around, like, well, why is there a witch? Like, why does she want to do us ill will, and all this sort of thing. So I kind of sat down and wrote out this concept of a story where we sort of like accidentally slighted this witch, and it's like her revenge tale upon us. And I storyboarded it out with Dan, and we like made a sort of, like, with very rudimentary crude drawings of stick figures and stuff. We sort of like had this very visual representation of like, okay, here's how this is going to kind of look, and here are like the big shots and stuff. So we hired Elwood Quincy Walker Jr. To be the director and cinematographer with his crew. And it was during the time that we had like the strikes here on the film industry in the States. So there were a lot of special effects makeup artists in Atlanta that were out of work. And so we hired a lot of them on to do this shoot. And we just, I really wanted to, and I think with all of our videos, especially from then moving forward, I always want to tell stories through very visual depiction that marries well with the music too. So it's, I think the biggest thing about making a good music video though is like, you have to find the right people, and it has to be a fun experience shooting the video. Otherwise, it just comes across as like, okay, well, here's just another plain Jane music video that nobody's really going to want to watch. So, but it's been a really fun experience because it has scratched that itch that I had from when I was a kid of like wanting to be a part of something that like makes visual art as well.
Has it totally scratched the itch? Now, would we ever, between the music videos and your love for horror movies, would we ever see you going down that route and maybe making a full-length film?
So the funny you mentioned that. So I don't know to what ends that will happen, but like, so next year, one of my big projects for next year is I'm actually writing a horror novel. That I have this really great idea for, and I've been working on the idea sort of conceptually for about a year, and I'm actually about to start research. The beginning of the story takes place in Bosnia in the near future, and it sort of involves the military in the beginning, but it's sort of it's sort of a creature feature monster story about this shape-shifting entity that follows a soldier home from war. And it but whereas I think a lot of people nowadays would make it like this sort of like, oh, it's clearly a message about PTSD, but a lot of sort of horror du jour is like, oh, is it all in his head or is it actually real? No, this is a real creature. This is a real entity. It's actual like legit horror. But yeah, so I'm writing this book over the next year, and I would love for it to be made cinematically, and so that is like something that I'm interested in, but I don't know to what end I'm interested in like being a director or anything in that regard. But I definitely want to write and create in a manner that would facilitate that for sure.
I like it. I like it. It's funny that you say about the creature feature. I'm always saying that the need to bring back that as a mainstream genre of horror movies, bring back the proper horror from the 80s, the early
Yeah.
90s that is properly scary. It's
Right.
really lacking these days.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of, I think what's become popular, and I do enjoy these films, is sort of the heady, very cerebral horror where it's a lot of metaphor and things like that, which is fun. I mean, it's like I said, there's nothing wrong with that, and I enjoy a lot of these kinds of films, but I do very much so miss, the very literal monster that is chasing the person down the hallway, and I think that these things are fun because the fun that you can have with that is that there's all these tropes and there's all these sort of stereotypes that get baked into those kinds of movies, but now we can play with those ideas and we can turn them against the reader or the viewer. And that's what I'm interested in doing, is sort of taking the expectation of what would happen based on a horror fan's previous knowledge of every other horror movie they've ever seen, and sort of turning that against them. But yes, it has to be, and for this one, for me, it has to be an actual creature. It has to be an actual monster. So that's going to be really fun.
I like it. I like it. Now, in the next couple of days, you're embarking on an EU/Ireland/UK tour.
Yeah.
Give us all the details we need to know.
Yeah, so we're hitting continental Europe first. We'll be mostly in Germany, but a bit into the Netherlands, and several dates there, and then we kick over to the UK for a bit. All of the shows in continental Europe and the beginning few shows in the UK are us headlining. We have some really cool bands that we're performing with, such as the Nightmares from the UK. They're a really phenomenal band. And basically, after that, though, going into Ireland and then the rest of the UK, we will be opening for my favorite band of all time, which is the Chameleons out of Manchester. And it's a really phenomenal, sort of surreal experience for me to be able to be performing with this band that I grew up listening to and that I've sort of been such a massive fan of for decades. And we've opened for them a few times here in the States now, and we get along with them really well. And again, it's like a dream to be able to, we get to play our part, but then afterwards I get to go watch my favorite band. And that's, as much as I love to create and perform music, I will always, I think, be moreover a fan of music just in general. So it's sort of it's a very different, I think, experience of touring that we've ever had before, because we get to really enjoy the rest of the night after we're done in a very different kind of way than what we're used to.
Yeah, I have to ask, in a scenario like that, you're getting to play with your all-time favorite band.
Right.
How long does it take for the kind of fanboy, to wear off and you become a contemporary, if you know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, one of the things that I've always reminded myself, and this is part of coming from my background between the military and being a firefighter and a paramedic and all that, was just like, just remembering that these are just people, I mean, that they're to be respected and appreciated, but they're people. And I think that, you know, keeping that in mind gives me a more tempered approach to handling, like talking to somebody like Mark Burgess, in the green room. Um, because I mean, I want to show respect and deference to everything that people like that have done. But I also just want to treat them as anybody else, because I think that's what most true artists want at the end of the day, is like, like I was literally talking to a friend an hour ago, and I I told him something that I very much so stand by. And I told him, I said, if I could do what we do, which is perform live music, and share art that I care very much so about, and that I understand that resonates with people. If I could do that, but not be known as a person like outside of that experience, I would do it in a heartbeat, because I mean, it's part of being a musician and building a name for the band, and I very much so acknowledge that. But I also miss my anonymity and like just being, not that I'm like even some like huge famous person. I'm really not. But I think that when you encounter certain people, there's like people just have very bizarre expectations of your interactions or like how you're supposed to be. And not that I would ever obviously be like rude to a fan or anything like that, but like you can't have a bad day on tour. You know what I mean? Like you have to
Yeah.
be like on all the time. And I think that most musicians that have been doing music in a professional sense understand that very acutely, and they're like, okay, I just want to be treated like everybody else. I don't deserve any sort of admiration, basically, in my opinion. Like the music and the art deserves the admiration, but me as an individual, I'm just some guy.
Right. Right. Do you think those days are kind of coming to an end though? The sort of worshipping rock
Yeah.
stars or actors,
Yeah.
because they're more accessible. Back in the
Yes.
80s, the likes of Bon Jovi and guys like that were gods, but it doesn't
Right.
seem that way as much now.
Right. No, I think it's definitely because of things like social media and like as artists, we're using those tools to like get to, for people to get to know us. And yeah, I mean, I think that it's very much so the case that that is much less. And I am all for it. I am all for leaving this like rock star identity kind of nonsense to be relegated to the dustbin of history, to be honest, because, uh, you know, as many incredible, amazing, wonderful people that I've met in the music industry, I've also met a lot of bastards,
Mm.
like a lot of people that don't deserve uh, to be even respected in a larger way, to be completely honest with you. And that's again, I'm not, I am no paragon of civilization or society, but I just don't, I've never really understood this sort of like cult of personality concept of anybody. I just don't think that nobody is beyond reproach. Nobody is beyond making mistakes, and we shouldn't hold uh, artists on a pedestal just because they make something that we enjoy. We should still hold people accountable for their behavior, their actions, and their demeanor.
I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. Now, the podcast is called Concerts That Made Us, so I have to ask you some concert related questions if you don't
Yeah,
mind.
absolutely.
First off, as a concert goer, what concerts would you say have made you?
Well, the first one that I ever saw is probably the most formative experience with live music. And now I was 14. I was here in Athens, Georgia, and my high school girlfriend's mother knew the owner of the infamous 40 Watt Club here in Athens, and the B-52s were having sort of a reunion show after not playing for a very long time. So this is sometime in the early 2000s. This must have been, maybe right at 2000.
Mm,
And so anyway, we got to go to the show that, normally we wouldn't have been able to be privy to because we were 14 years old. But yeah, we watched the B-52s play in this, pretty small room. It's the 40 watts, 600 capacity room. And I'll never forget standing there. And I was a very shy kid when I was in high school and when I was a teenager. I hadn't found my sense of confidence in the world and with myself. And I just never felt fully comfortable in my own skin, especially out in public, because I was just sort of like very much so into goth as a teenager, and I was very awkward looking. And, I just didn't, I never felt comfortable in public. But I remember being at this show and the B-52s came out on stage and they started playing, and I was just transfixed. And I was blown away because the thing that really caught me about it was like, yeah, the music was great and the performance is amazing. But I looked around and we're in this room full of adults, and every single person in that venue was dancing like with reckless abandon. I mean, everybody was dancing so hard, and having a great time. And my girlfriend and I, we danced like crazy. And it was one of the first times in my entire life where I felt truly at ease enjoying something without fear. And I think that's a big problem in our world, is that we're made to feel bad to celebrate the things that we're passionate about and that we love. We're made to feel like, oh, you're a nerd or you're cringy or whatever because you're excited about something. And so I think that's something that's really truly sort of magical and alchemical about live music, is that you get together in this crowd, and the crowd becomes an entity, but you are sort of lost in the the forest for the trees, and you can sort of enjoy yourself fully because of that, and you can sort of like let go of the inhibition of fear of perception in a good show like that. So that was probably the most important one for me, was that very first show. Yeah.
Oh man, that sounds like one hell of a first show.
Yeah.
And for any listeners that haven't been lucky enough to catch one of your shows, what
Mm.
can they expect? Give us the full experience if you can.
Yeah, I mean, I think our shows are it's the show, it's the kind of show that I would want to see effectively. It's, we're very active, we run around a lot, we keep it, exciting, I think, physically. We put 100% into every show, whether there's one person in attendance or 1,000 people in attendance. It doesn't matter to me. It's the same show. But I like to talk a lot about the songs. I tell a bit of story and background to some of the music, because I think it matters to the effect of what you're hearing, and not just to enjoy. I mean, I want everybody to enjoy the music in and of itself, but I think it enhances the experience to understand how I feel about these songs and where they come from. And there's a bit of political pointedness to it, but I like to speak in broad strokes, and so that it's something that is more accessible and understandable, and I try not to do it in a way that alienates people. But yeah, overall, it's just it's the emphasis is on energy and explosiveness and fun, and just building an environment that people feel comfortable to engage with that music to whatever degree they truly want to.
Sounds like a hell of a night. And if you think of all the shows you've played to date, is there one that sits above the rest, as a high point, just couldn't have got any better?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a couple that come to mind, like when we played Wave Gothic Treffen in Leipzig last year, and we played on the main stage, and we played in front of about 5,000 people, which was definitely the largest crowd we've ever played to. And it was just, the sheer energy that comes out of that size of a crowd is really, really incredible. It very much so resonated with the crowd, which was cool. Because at a festival environment, you're playing to a broad swath of people. Some people are there to see you, some are just finding you for the first time. So that was a cool experience. But I think I don't know that there's any specific one show, but I really appreciate now, looking back on some of our first shows and our first tours, because we were still building our audience, and some of those shows, we played to very, very small crowds, like just quite literally a handful of people. But those were incredible experiences, because we were still learning how to do it and how to be on stage, and sort of learning stagecraft. But I feel like those early shows, the energy was like very, very raw. We were technically nowhere near as good as we are now, but the energy was super raw and just really distilled. Um, so yeah, some of those shows from the beginning for me were really, really uh, laden with just great memory because sometimes I wish I could just jump back in time and go play one of those shows again.
I could imagine. Do you think it's maybe you had a hunger back then that maybe has subsided a little bit now?
Yeah, to some effect. I mean, I think when you're starting out as a touring band, before we started doing this full time, you're definitely curious and yes, hungry for more of it and to kind of push the envelope to see where it goes. And my curiosity to that end is definitely not as intense.
Hmm.
But now I feel like it changes. Like your desire to perform becomes more involved to making the experience the best it can be versus like how big it can be or like what kind like how many people can we get into a show or like what size of a venue. Like those things are a little more immaterial to me now, and it's more about like how do we make this the best possible experience for each individual. And I'm more connected to that than I am to sort of numerical progress or anything like that.
I like it. I like it. And when it comes to showtime, then your pre-show and post-show, how do you psych yourself up? And then afterwards, how do you like to wind down?
Yeah, I mean, I think my routine before playing is I have to eat food no earlier than 3 hours before the show, or else I will have a very bad time on stage. So I find myself eating very early in the day, and I do my vocal warm ups, and honestly, I like to just kind of if we're headlining, I always go watch the opening bands if there are an opener, and that really gets me energized and excited. And I like to just I also just like to show the support to that other act that we're sharing the stage with. But that always gets me like in the mood for jumping up there as well. It excites me. But then yeah, my lead up right before the show is to do my vocal warm ups and sort of stretch and just kind of have a few minutes of quiet. It's like the calm before the storm, and just kind of running through all the songs in my head, and getting my hands on a guitar maybe a little bit to warm up my fingers, and just having a few minutes to yourself before you go lay everything out. Because anytime that I get on a stage, I'm going to put everything that I have on that stage, and I'm not going to leave a single percent behind. So, and then after the show, I mean, I'm easy. I'm a head to the pub for a beer or two, and then call it a night. Nothing crazy, but I like to go out and socialize and just enjoy the end of the night, and sort of cap off the success of it, and just have a good time.
Sounds good. Sounds good. And before we dive into the last couple of questions, then
Yeah.
future plans set in stone. Anything you can share with us?
I mean, next year is going to be a little bit of a different year for us. As I mentioned, I'm writing this book next year, so I will be spending a lot of time focusing on that. The band is not going into hiatus or anything like that, but we're just going to be kind of touring a little less. But I think within that, the tours will be a little more deliberate, whereas so like when we go on tour, for example, in America, especially, we like to play a lot of really smaller towns and things like that. We take our time on these tours. We go out for, sometimes over a month at a time. And for the past 2 years, we've been playing sort of like 6 or 7 months of the year on the road, which is not exactly the most sustainable practice, to be honest with you, because you need to get home, you got to rest, you got to recuperate, and then you have to write and create, the next record or the next song or whatever. Um, so this next year will be a little more limited in the scope of our tours. But I think we're going to be playing exactly the shows and the kind of shows that only that we really want to play because of that. And I mean, I fully intend to come back to Europe and the UK at some point, probably in the summer, if I had to guess. But I'm also so insofar as like future plans. I'm already working on new music. I'm working on new songs, and I think they are very different. I'm not as like geared up for this concept of like getting out a fourth record. I think what I'm planning on doing is just sort of like releasing songs as they come, and then eventually collecting a few of those songs, and then writing the back end of what would be a fourth record. But I'm more interested in just sort of like working on individual songs as individual projects and then releasing them when they're done instead of building this like large body of work, so that we can keep it exciting and keep it fresh and keep new music kind of always flowing, and which I think is a good way to do things nowadays with streaming and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, even though I think things will be very different for us in this next year, it's going to be a very good experience overall, and it's by no means stopping. And we have a lot coming.
It's good to hear. It's good to hear. Just wanted to add as well, you've been announced as part of the lineup for Sick New World Festival in Vegas as well, haven't you?
Yeah, that's super exciting. It's such an insane lineup. I love so many of the bands on the bill, and it's a total honor, to be even considered for it, let alone accepted onto such an incredible lineup. But what I really love about it is the diversity of the bill. I mean, there's thrash metal, there's death metal, there's new metal, there's goth, there's post punk, there's like bizarre pop stuff. I mean, it's everything. It's such a cool lineup, and there's a little bit of something for everybody. But it's funny because we're definitely going to be one of the first bands that plays that day. But I'm so happy about that because that means I get to put on the show. We're going to crush it, and then I get to go watch all these amazing bands all day long. So I'm very excited about that for sure.
Sounds like you're going to have a hell of a time from playing to watching.
Yes, definitely.
And we'll dive into the last couple of questions. So there are
Sure.
a couple of fun random ones. First off, besides the band and music and writing the book, of course, what are you currently obsessed with?
Oh man, that's a great question. So when I was a kid, I was super into tabletop wargaming, and I played a lot of Warhammer 40K. So I've been back into that now. I guess it's my midlife crisis. I don't know. But I've gotten back into Warhammer, which is a tabletop sort of future set, sort of like it's like chess on steroids, but you assemble miniature models and you paint them, and you go to battle against a variety of alien factions, but it's a very communal experience. You go to the hobby shop and you play with people that you've maybe never met before, and so I've been all about that because the game has been around for like 40 years, and there's this very deep lore to it, and there's all these great books you can read, and there's like movies and all. I mean, it's just a really immersive universe. And but I also just love the process of building and painting the miniatures, because it's a very quieting process for my mind. because you have to be so focused. I mean, these are very tiny little miniatures, and you're working with all these paints and glues, and you're whittling down the molding lines off of the miniatures. And I mean, it's just it's almost meditative for me, and I love it because my mind is just full of noise and chaos all the time. So for anything where I can just turn off that noise and focus in on something, I love doing. So that's been my recent obsession. It's very nerdy, but I love it.
I actually totally get that though, because I used to build model cars. And the
Yeah,
time you would spend, like you said, whittling down the brakes in it and painting
right.
it, gluing it, you're right, it's like a meditation. You could
Yeah,
get lost, and before you know it, you're after spending about 15 hours doing it.
yeah, exactly. I mean, I spent uh, about 7 hours building basically a small model tank the other day. So, it's just like, but it's so satisfying when you get to the
Mm.
end and you're like, oh, that's really cool. And it's just so cool to see uh, the work that goes into it, and also the sort of progress you make. The more you do it, the better you get at it. And it's fun to like, I've been spending hours down rabbit holes on YouTube of like learning different painting techniques and learning different ways of assembling things better, and just little kind of little hacks that people create. And I'm like, oh, that's so cool, I got to try that. It's like I said, incredibly deeply nerdy, but I don't care because it's so much fun.
Exactly, exactly. And the final one, what's your go-to album? An album you constantly revisit?
Oh man, I think I have two. There's one which is I guess a little more obvious, which is Script of the Bridge by the Chameleons. That's a record that I can literally put on my record player or throw on my headphones, and I'll play it from start to finish. No skips. It's a perfect record to me. It's the production, the lyrics, the diversity of songs, the emotional core of it. It's a phenomenally written record, handling, you know, very deep, meaningful subjects. And I just think that Mark, that's his masterpiece, in my opinion. But I also really love The Cure's Disintegration. I think that record is the distillation of what makes The Cure a special band. There's a bit of whimsy to it, but mostly, mysterious, dark intensity, but all passion and all incredible songwriting. I mean, every single song on that record has a phenomenal hook that is just so well crafted and so well designed. And yeah, I'm definitely obsessed with that record as well.
Easy to see why. Listen, Dusty, this has been an absolute pleasure now. Thanks a million.
Yeah, thank you so much. Likewise, it's great to talk with you.
You prophesize the end of
Hey guys, I really hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please rate and review us on iTunes and Spotify. And if you're interested in signing up to Band Builder Academy, use the link in the show notes below and enter the code CONCERTS and you'll receive 10% off. So, until next time, keep rocking. Hey, what are you guys still doing here? The show's over. It's over. You can go home. Go on. We'll see you next time. We'll be here.